Hi, good morning, everyone. Today we'll continue with classification. Last week we had started working on predictive data science, and we had taken regression as the and we had worked with regression as our first example. Just to summarize a few things that from our perspective, decision on when do we use regression and when we will resort to classification is based on what is the type of expected output. So when the expected output or the y variable, which we also call as the prediction variable or the target, if the y variable is likely to take a continuous value, like the price of a house, or maybe if you're trying to measure the height of a child given the age, all of these things would be continuous variable. And even the earlier example that we have taken, given the rainfall, if we're trying to predict how much would be the rice production, it could be any number. And therefore, in those cases, we need to use regression. But there is another type of problem where the y variable would be a defined number of categories. For example, if you want to categorize our customers into excellent, very good, good, or uh, if you want to categorize the digits into 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, or if we are doing an image recognition and the system is supposed to identify whether this is a cat or a dog. If you're going into, say, natural language processing, then and if you want to identify that whose voice is it or which word would be the next word. So all of these things, there is a finite number of values which the y variable can take. That means it is so each of these values we call it as a class, and therefore this exercise is called classification. It means that you are trying to put a given observation, whatever x value we have been given, we are trying to put that into one of the classes which the y can take. Okay, so that's the classification exercise, and we had taken some of the examples that why a classification exercise would be required, because many of the service providers, like say telecom, they would like to know for each customer that who are likely to continue and who are likely to switch. That would be one of the use cases. On an e-commerce website, on an online shopping site, we would like to know that who is a real prospective customer, and if yes, which are the products they're likely to buy. In the case of insurance, they could decide that whether this person should go for a further medical test or not. In the case of the banks, they would like to know that whether a loan should be advanced to a given applicant or not. And there are several other cases where we want to classify the person or an object into one of the defined categories. And for that kind of problem, classification is the kind of algorithm that we would be using. So, what is classification? It is determining the likelihood of an object being part of one of the given classes. So, it could be as simple as saying that whether it belongs to this class or not. So, the answer could be yes or no, whether he is likely to switch the service or not, whether he is a likely customer or not, whether the loan can be given or not. So, here it's a classification into only two categories, likely or not likely. So that kind of classification we call as the binary classification. And there could be other type of classification where the number of classes could be multiple, the number of classes could be more than one. For example, exercise that we are doing, digit recognition, that is whether a given handwritten digit or a number, which number is that? So it can be from 0 to 9, any of the 10 categories or any of the 10 classes. That is what the values it can take. If you want to classify our customer into excellent, good, very good, and so on, it could be 5 different classes. So it could be a binary classification or it could be multi-class classification. And then we'll go through the workings of the notebook today. We'll spend some more time in detail that how the code is being written. And we will take the example of we are trying to teach the machine how to recognize which digit it is. And all these digits are handwritten. The examples that we are taking for training is 70,000 observations or 70,000 images of handwritten digits, which has been taken from various documents, and all of them have been presented in the form of pixels. So all we have been given the pixel data, and so that is ranging from 0 to 255, and 255 is representing the dark spot, and since the and zeros they represent the white spots. That's the data which has been given to us. Okay. So we had done the classification. I will run through the code once again. But what are the performance parameters that we use when we are running a classification algorithm? When we ran the regression algorithm, we had used mainly RMSE and R squared. These were the two performance parameters that we were using to assess whether my regression algorithm is working fine or not. So RMSE is the root mean squared error. Error was being the difference between the actual value and the value that the algorithm predicts. If there is a difference, that is the error because that is how far it is from the actual value. Then we take sum of them. Now, in the process of summing, the plus and minus may cancel out, and that would give us the wrong picture because if there is a deviation, some deviations are on the plus side, some deviation on the minus side, it should not cancel out, and that's why we take the square of the error so that the plus minus sign goes away. And then we take an mean of that, the average of that. And since we had a squared, then we take a square root. So that's the root mean squared error or the RMSE. And the second measure was R squared, which takes a value between 0 and 1. And closer to 1 it is, higher the accuracy of the prediction, because the R square says that out of the total variation, how much variation my estimator or my regression formula, which we normally represent as y is equal to bx plus c, how much of the variation my estimator is able to capture. So if it is able to capture a larger amount of variation, it means that my estimator has been a good estimator. So that these were the two things which we were using as a performance parameter to judge whether my algorithm, whether my estimator is giving me a good performance or not. Now, the same thing would not work in the case of classification. In the classification, we use different algorithms, and that is what we will try to understand today, because as we go into the code, at the end of that, we have to make a judgment that whether the algorithm that we have trained or the model that we have taken, whether it is giving me a good result or not. And that would be the criteria based on which we can distinguish different models. These are the criteria based on which we'll decide which model to actually take into production. So when we do the classification, we have the labels, that is, we have the actual value that which observation belongs to which class or which category, and then we will have our prediction. So suppose we are doing a binary classification, that we are making an estimate whether this person should be, you know, should go for an additional medical test when he is applying for insurance or not. So from the past, the actual values I will have as yes or no, and I will do the classification as yes or no. So what are the possibilities? The possibilities is that maybe a person should have gone for a medical test, and my algorithm says that he should not go for a medical test. It means that there is a difference between the classification, the actual classification, and the class to which my algorithm predicts. In the case of the digit recognition, maybe actually it was 8, but my system says that it is 9. That kind of situation can arise. So actually there are 4 different types of combinations possible. Let's take, if a person is going for taking a COVID test, and then the result could be that either he is COVID positive or COVID negative. These are the two outcomes possible. Now, what may happen is that on the one hand, we have the result of the test, and on the other hand, it is the actual thing. It means that a person may have COVID and he goes for a test. The test may be positive, the test may be negative, because every time the test is not going to give the correct result. Any kind of test that we have, it may recognize the disease maybe 90% or 95% times correctly, but there would always be some cases where the test has gone wrong. So when the test goes wrong, it goes wrong in two ways. That a person is having COVID, and then my test says that he does not have COVID. On the other hand, it could say that a person does not have COVID. Actually, he is not having COVID, but my test result is saying that he is having COVID, or my test result is positive. Both of these situations are common. Common means their percentage could be lower, but it always happens. It happens even in the test like cancer. Maybe your accuracy is 98%, 99%, but there would always be some small percentage where the test is going wrong. And when it goes wrong in two ways. One is that the disease exists, but my test says that it does not exist. The second way could be that disease does not exist, and the test may say that the disease exists, like COVID. So if we combine these two, we get 4 different types of problems, or 4 different types of categories. So let's say that our test result could be positive, or my test result could be negative. Okay, so if you see here, my test result could be positive, or my test result could be negative. Now, just because the test result is positive or negative, that does not mean that the person actually has that disease, because the test result itself could be wrong. Then we say that what is the sorry the here it was the actual. On the x-axis we are showing the actual, and on the y-axis we are showing the prediction here in this chart. So the prediction could be that it is positive or negative, and in the actual, in reality, we will say that we should use that whether it is true or false. It means that if the disease actually exists, then we'll call that as true. And if the disease does not exist, we'll call that as false. Okay. Let me. We'll use these two. So if the disease actually exists, we'll call that as true. And if the disease does not exist, we'll call that as false. And the outcome of my prediction, we'll say that whether it is positive or negative. Okay. So suppose a person truly has COVID and the test result is positive, then we call that as true positive. It means that he actually has and the test result is also positive. That is called true positive. Now, there could be some cases where a person actually had COVID, but the test result came negative because all the time my test result is not going to be correct. So, in some cases, the test result may show that this person does not have COVID, but actually he had. Now, those cases will be, so that would be the second category. The third category would be that he has the test result is positive, but he did not really have the disease. It means that he was actually, the actual situation is false. He does not have the disease, but my test result is showing positive. So that is the false positive. It means that showing the result as positive is actually false. He does not have the disease. So those things would be called false positive. Then there would be a fourth kind of result where he does not have the disease and the result is negative. Okay. So that means it is true negative. Now, this one is a bit confusing. It will take you maybe 2 or 3 iterations to really understand what is going on. So, what we say that the on the one hand we have the outcome of the result and whether that outcome is true or false. Okay, that is what we assess here. So, if the outcome is positive and that state or that result is true, it means that that result is correct. Then we call it as true positive. It means the COVID test result came positive and he is actually having COVID. So it means that the test result is actually true. So that will be true positive. A person who does not have COVID and he is tested and his test result is negative, it means that his test result was negative and that being negative is actually true or is actually correct. So that will be called true negative. Now, it may happen that the test result is positive, but that positive is actually incorrect because the person does not have COVID. So, that we will call as the false positive. It means that when it is showing positive, it is actually a false result. And the fourth one could be that the test result is negative, but the person is actually having positive. Okay, so that would be false negative. It means that the negative outcome that we are getting out of the result or out of the test is actually not true. So that will be a false negative. So any classification that we do, it can fall into these four categories. Now, how do we assess that my classification is correct or not? Or in this case, we are trying to classify a person into COVID positive or COVID negative. So that classification, whether it is good or bad, how do we know? So if the person is having COVID and my test result also says that this person has COVID. On the other hand, if the person is not having COVID and the test result shows that this person does not have COVID, then my test result is good. It means that the ratio of the true positive and the true negative, if that is high, that means my testing process is good. But if it is giving lots of false negative or false positive, then my testing is not very good. And what is false positive? That my test result is showing positive, but the person does not really have COVID. And what is false negative? It means that my test result is showing that he does not have COVID, but he actually had COVID. So if my false positive and false negative, these are high in the testing process, that means my testing is not really very effective. It's not very accurate. Okay. And that's why one of the measures which is very important is how accurate my testing is. So we measure the accuracy of a classification process as the ratio of, on the one, we take the true positive plus the true negative. It means that how many times the testing actually gave me the correct result, and divide that by the total. So if I did say 100 different tests, and maybe uh, out of them, if I did 100 tests and 10 came true positive, it means that there were 10 people who were having the disease, and my test also showed that yes, they were having the disease. And suppose there were 80 people where it came negative, it means that 80 people did not have the disease, and my test result also showed negative, it means that he does not have the disease. And I had tested 100 people, so it means that my accuracy is 0.9 or 90%. So the question would be that whether this 0.90 is good, bad, or ugly, that is a different matter of interpretation. But first of all, we need to get that how accurate my testing process is. And the accuracy is 90% in this case. Now, the remaining 10 cases could be false negative or false positive. So maybe we got the false positive as, say, 6. What does this mean? That my test result shows that these people are having COVID, but they were actually not having COVID. And there could be a false negative of remaining 4. So it means that for 4 people, it showed that he did not have COVID. It means that my test result was negative, and that result was incorrect or false. Okay, so that's how in every classification we are having these 4 possibilities, that my test result is positive and that result is correct. That we call as a true positive. My test result is negative and that result is correct. We call it true negative. My test result is positive, but that result is incorrect. That we call as the false positive. And my test result is negative, and that result is incorrect. It means that he was actually having the disease. That is called the false negative. So both false negative and false positives we should try to avoid. Or a test result which is giving me a lower number of false positive and false negative, and a higher number of true positive and true negative is a good process. So if my accuracy is high, I know that it is giving correct result larger number of time, and therefore one measure that we look at is whether the accuracy number is high or not. Now again, going back to our discussion which we had even in the case of regression, that whether zero point 0.9 is good enough or acceptable, or 0.95 is good enough or acceptable, or 0.99 is good enough or acceptable, that depends upon the context that we are dealing with. Now, if we are dealing with, say, ordinary flu, then maybe 0.90 is acceptable, because ordinary flu, the treatment is not very costly. The treatment is, and the impact of the ordinary flu, even in very few cases, it will be fatal. But if it is the COVID test, then are we willing to live with 90% of accuracy? It means that 10% of the people are being diagnosed incorrectly. And the consequences could be that I am putting someone into a very costly treatment, even if he did not have the disease. And that would be the cases where my test result was positive, but the person was not actually having COVID. So he will have to undergo the hospitalization process and everything which happens there. And there could be some cases which is even worse, is the false negative. It means that a person had COVID and my test result says that he does not have, and therefore I said that no treatment is required. So he goes back and then the symptoms actually aggravates, and then he may come back again, and then maybe we'll do the test again. So the false negative in these cases are very dangerous. So if it is common flu, we may decide that okay, 0.90 is fine, but if it is COVID, then maybe we'll say that no, it should be at least 0.97 or 0.98, and these things would be decided in consultation with the customer, in consultation with the domain experts. But our job as a data scientist is to give these numbers and have a consultation with them and say that which is the acceptable threshold, what should be the acceptable threshold for accuracy, and we will target to achieve that accuracy through our models. So if a model is not giving me that kind of accuracy, we'll reject that model, we'll try some other model, because as we have seen in the regression that we have different models available, we will experiment with these models and see that what the results are, and then we'll choose the best model. In that case, random forest was giving me the best result. I mean, it was 0.8% or higher. And we said that, okay, while it comes to the prediction of the housing prices, 80% accuracy may be acceptable. But when it comes to diagnosing COVID, then maybe 90% is not acceptable. We should target for a higher accuracy. But apart from that, there could be certain other measures. So accuracy is telling me that how much of the results are actually correct. So the correct results are the true results, the true positive and true negative, both are actually the correct classification. Because true positive, again, so this one you will have to keep thinking in your mind what is true positive and how we uh, remember that positive and negative is the outcome of the test. Now, outcome of the test need not always be correct. So I'm doing some testing. That testing process is always prone to some errors. So on the one hand, I have the outcome of the testing process, which could be positive or negative. And that outcome or that result that we get, it could be correct or incorrect. So for the correct or incorrect, we'll use the word true or false. So if my test result is positive and that result is correct, then we say that it is true positive. If the test result is negative and that result is correct, it means that he was actually negative. Then we call that as true negative. Other two categories are the test result is positive, but that result is incorrect. It means that he is not really positive. That will be false positive. And the last one is that my test result is negative, but that result is incorrect. It means that he actually has the disease. That will be false negative. Okay, so these are the four different categories. So one element was accuracy, where we say that how many times the result actually came correct. So that was true positive plus true negative by total. So that tells me accuracy. But there are certain other measures also that we will look at, and these have their own importance. So in different conditions, we would like to use different types of measures. So precision is another measure which actually tells that out of all the positive results, that my testing process gave, how many were actually positive? So here we are not even considering the negative results which my system gave or which my testing process gave. We are saying that how precise was my diagnosis. It means that if my diagnosis said that somebody is having COVID, how many of them were actually having COVID? So how precise my diagnosis was. And there is another measure is called recall. It means that out of the entire population that I tested, or all the different observations which I had, how many were how many positive cases I was able to figure out. So how many were actually positive, and out of them, how many I able to identify. So recall is that out of all the people who were positive, how many I am able to identify that they were positive. So how many people were actually positive? It was the true positive and also the false negative. It means that there were some part of the people who were actually positive, but my system gave negative. So those were the false negative. So if you see the true positive and false negative, these two combined tell me how many were actually positive in the entire population. And out of them, whatever is the true positive, that's what I was able to identify. Now, I know that it is in the first glance, it is a bit confusing, and therefore we'll keep coming to this again and again. So, for the time being, let's say that we will be working with three different parameters. One is the accuracy, the second is precision, the third is recall, and we will also work with the fourth parameter. I mean, although we can go on devising many other parameters, but we'll work primarily with four. One is the accuracy, the second is recall, the third one is precision. So if you say recall is saying that if I had actually 10 people who were having this disease, was I able to identify all the 10? Okay. Precision tells that my test result actually showed that, say, there were 12 people who had COVID. So my test result said 12 people were positive. Were all the 12 really positive? That tells me the precision of my uh, testing process. So these are the three different parameters. And then the fourth one, we will take harmonic average or harmonic mean of the recall and precision. So we'll combine the two measures, and that we call as the F1 score. These are the four main parameters that we'll be working with. Okay. So accuracy tells me how many times my result was correct. Recall tells me that how many were actually positive, and out of that, how many I was able to identify. So, for example, if there are 10 people who are actually positive, I was able to identify that 8 were really having the disease. In that case, I was able to identify 8 people correctly. And that would be my recall. It means that how many times I am able to recall the positive cases. And the precision is that all that I was able to identify as positive, how many of them were actually positive. So that shows me the precision of my testing process. Let's take a few examples that in which cases, why in some cases the accuracy is not sufficient. Why shall we not go with accuracy in the first place? Let's take the example of the COVID itself. In a population, or in the case of the medical diagnosis, a large number of people will be negative. So even with the increasing cases of the COVID today, we know that in the population of 130 crores, now we are touching maybe around 45 lakhs, or after some time it may become even 50 lakhs. Even if we assume that the total number will reach to 1 crore, that is still a very small fraction of the total population. It will be less than 1%. So 99% of the people, let's assume that they will remain negative. And a a testing process is, so a large number will be negative, and the testing process actually shows that they are, negative. So in this case, the accuracy is likely to be high because it is very unlikely that you define a test process and several times people who are not having the disease, it will go on saying that you have the disease, you have the disease. That is unlikely. So your accuracy score is likely to be very high in any case because you have a very large number of true negatives. But what I want to do in these cases, what I am concerned with is that if a person came to the hospital, he was having COVID, I should be able to identify that he is having COVID, because I don't want to leave out a person who was having the disease, but my system was not able to identify. So it means that if a person was positive, I should be able to identify him as positive. That means I am looking for a very high recall score. In this case, what I am looking for is a very high recall score. If a person was positive, I should be able to identify him as positive. Whereas in some other cases, I would like to go for precision. It means that I should be, my testing process should be correct. So here, what may happen that if my recall is high, I am able to identify the person as positive. So my goal here is that a person should not be diagnosed as negative if he had the disease, because the consequences of leaving him out is very dangerous. So I am willing to live with a situation where I am able, where the test result is saying that you are positive, even though he did not have the disease. So in the cases where the disease could be fatal, being wrong, giving a wrong diagnosis as positive, that is only going to cost the person somewhat money, but at least he would not die. So in those cases, my focus is that if a person is having a disease, I should be able to recognize that in the process. Even if I am recognizing some people as positive, even though they did not have the disease, that is acceptable because this disease could be fatal. So in that case, I may go for a higher recall and not go for, accuracy may be another measure, but I would focus more on the recall, because the being not able to recall the positive cases or being not able to identify the positive cases, that is very dangerous. In some other cases, we could go for precision. It means that whatever we are identifying as positive, whether they are actually positive or not. Okay. So out of the test results which I have, whether everyone is actually positive or not, it means that what we are trying to take a risk at is that the false positive means the people who are, the test result is positive, but that was not really true. So in different circumstances, we'll use either accuracy or precision or recall. So is the idea of the false positive, true positive, false negative, true negative, is that somewhat clear to you? Or at least, even if we don't focus on the accuracy, precision, and recall, is the true positive, false negative, true negative. Are these four concepts clear to you? I am aware that in the first go, it's not very easy to understand that what these measures mean, but at least in this session, we should be clear about what is true positive, false negative, and true negative. Then we will be able to work with the classification process. So if you can confirm that these four are clear to you, then I will proceed with the next section. Great. Now we are ready to work with our classification models, because now we understand what accuracy is. At least accuracy, we know that how many times it gives me the correct result. And when we say correct result, it is positive, and that positive is the correct diagnosis. The test result is negative, and that result is the correct result. It means that it is identifying positive as positive and negative as negative. That is accuracy. So to, today we'll compute the other parameters also, but we will maybe decide the validity of the model or the accuracy of, or whether we should use the model or not based on our accuracy parameters. So let's go to our classification exercise. So I will go slowly, uh, cell by cell, and what we are doing, and ask me questions if you have difficulty in grasping or understanding why we are doing one step or the other, or one line of code or the other. So first we import. I think there is no problem here. I'm just suppressing a few warnings. Then we get the data. As you have seen that in some cases, so in the real life, your data would be available from multiple sources, and therefore, this step is not that important, because you are not going to receive the data in real life from sklearn data sets. It is going to come from your customer. So either you will receive the data from the customer, or you will receive the data from inside the organization, or you may get the data from somewhere on the internet. So your data source is going to be different. What we need to understand is that in Python, you are able to read all types of data. It can be a CSV file, it can be an Excel file, and as we have seen earlier, it can be even the text file. We can read from the internet, we can read a website and extract the information. We have seen that earlier, that we were able to read two different articles from the internet, and we tried one from Wikipedia and one from a news article. So all these things we can do. There are different ways that we can read file and we can store that data. Having got that data, we need to see that in which form the data has come. In the case of Python, we have the most commonly used data types would be the list, dictionary, tuples, sets, and then we can convert them into data frame using pandas. So the data set that we have got here is a dictionary, and we can test that by calling is instance. Then we give the variable name, and then we say dictionary. So it says a true, it means that digit is actually a dictionary. Okay. So what is the characteristic of a dictionary? The dictionary is comprised of what we call as a key value pair. There would be a key, and for each key, you will have certain values. So if you see in the list, it is only a collection of elements. It does not have any key value pair. So if just 1, 2, 3, that would be a list. But if you say that no, if we combine that with the keys, it means that suppose um, in a room you have one chair, uh, say one table, two chairs, and three sofa. And if you want to store that in that key value pair, so my key is table, and then say table one, chair two, sofa three. So that this kind of information we would like to store in a dictionary because I can store these data against the keys. So key and what is the value of that key. So that kind of storage that kind of information we do in dictionary. So all of these is available in the previous worksheets. You should revisit that, and then you will see that how to use a dictionary, how to use a list. So, but just to repeat that, list is just a collection of the elements, and this collection is what we call as mutable. It means that we can go on adding or you know subtracting or removing. So the content of the list can be changed. Content of a dictionary can also be changed. Then we come to tuple. Tuple is also a list of elements, just like a list. So it is the collection of elements. But tuple is immutable. It means that once you have defined a tuple, like say 1, 2, 3, now we can add 4 to the list, but you cannot add 4 to the tuple. So in certain circumstances, we would like to use tuple because having defined it once, we would not like the system or any other agent to change that uh, information or to change that collection. So in those cases, we use tuple. Otherwise, it is the operations are almost exactly the same as list. So an immutable list, a list which cannot be altered later on after it has been defined, that is called tuple. Then we have set. So in the list, in the tuple, or in the dictionary, you can have the elements repeating itself. So I can define a list as 1, 1, 2, 2. But set is an collection of objects where the objects can't repeat. So if you in the set you can't give 1, 1, 2. It will always be just 1, 2 because none of the elements are allowed to repeat. So that kind of thing is called set. So list, tuple, dictionary, set. So these are the four data types or four types of collections of data that you should always remember. And data frame, it is like a two-dimensional, matrix, just like Excel. And so two-dimensional matrix we can define as an array also. But the benefit of the data frame is that you can have the name of the columns, you can have the name of the indexes. So it becomes just like an Excel. So you have a header for the rows, you have the column names, you have the row names. So it becomes very easy to operate. And the second benefit of the data frame is what we call as the vectorized operations. It means that same operation I can do on the entire column. So I can give the column name plus 2. So it will go and add 2 to each of the values in the column. So if I have say 20,000 records, I don't have to go and add separately, or I don't even have to write a for loop or a while loop for adding to each of these 20,000 elements. I can just say, for example, if we take the housing data set that we had, if I want to add, say, 2 to all the elements of, say, total bedroom, then I have to just say housing, and then within bracket, we'll put the column name. So we'll say housing total bedroom plus 2. If we do that, then it will add 2 to all the 20,640 records that we have. So these kind of operations are called the vectorized operation. So in pandas, the vectorized operations actually can, becomes very handy to deal with. So it becomes even more powerful than Excel, because in Excel, you will give formula in one cell, then you have to copy the formula across, then only it will take value. So in the pandas, we don't even have to do that. Just say column name and then the operation, either the addition, subtraction, multiplication, whatever you want to do. So pandas becomes very useful if I have to do any kind of vectorized operation. It's also very handy because in visualizing data, it has the provision to giving the column names, the row names, and so on. So these are the five things that we have talked about: list, dictionary, tuple, set, and then we have the data frame. So here the data that we have got is in the form of a dictionary. If we have the dictionary, then we can see that what are the keys. It means that what are the different things about which the information or the data is available. So in this case, it has got data, target, frame, feature name, and several other things. So it has data, it has the target. So data would be my X. Those are the features. Target is Y. Then frame, I will have to check what the frame is. Maybe we can check here what the frame is. So if I say, so frames actually does not contain anything because feature names has the data. So you have the data that is which contains the features, and I have the feature names. It means that it has given the column headers for each feature that we have. We have target, and we have the target name, which is the class or the classes in which the categorization would be done. Then we have the description of different things. The frame does not contain anything. I think description. Let's see what is there in description. So it gives you the description of this data set. So if we read here, it says that MNIST database of handwritten digits with 784 features, raw data available at so and so URL. It can be split in a training set of the first 60,000 examples and a test set of 10,000 examples. It means that the data itself is arranged in a way that we have the first 60,000 examples which should be used as a training set, and the last 10,000 example is what should be used as the testing set. It means that we don't really need to apply the train test split for doing a random split between training and testing. The data itself is arranged in a fashion that the first 60,000 should be taken as the uh, training set, and the remaining 60,000, remaining 10,000 should be taken as the testing set. Why that has been done is because we are talking about 10 different classes, and these 10 different classes would be digits 0 to 9. And we also need to ensure that there is almost equal distribution between training and testing. So if the data is not, if we take a random cut, then it may happen that we don't have an equal distribution of each digit in the training set as well as the testing set. So that's why this data set is structured in a fashion that the first 60,000, it is recommended that we take the first 60,000 as the training set and the last 10,000 as the testing set. Then some more information is available. It is a subset of a larger set available from NIST. Digits have been normalized and all that information is there. Then it says that the last part is important, that the images are centered in 28 by 28, and there is some more information here. So there is a lot of information about available about the data set itself. Okay. Then target name, details, categories, URL. We're not going to use them in our processing. So if you receive some information in the form of a dictionary, then we can see what are the keys and what are the values of the keys. So now the values of the keys we can just get by putting the dictionary name, and within the bracket if we give the keys, then it will fetch the values. So just as here we typed out description, which is one of the keys, then it will fetch the value of the description and it showed us the description. So now using the same syntax, so if I give digit, which is the name of the dictionary, within bracket, if I give the key, it will fetch the values of that key. And so I am fetching the value of the features and the target and storing that to two different variables. So this is also you have seen in Python that we can do the assignment to multiple variables at the same time. So on the right side of this assignment, so equal to sign, as we have seen, is used for assignment of values. So on the right side, we are getting two different values. So on the left side of this assignment, I will also assign that to two different variables. So we are using X for data, which is features, and Y for target, which is the labels. So now after I give this command, I have all the features in X and all the labels or targets in Y. Let's see what kind of data we have got here. So if we use type of X and type of Y, it shows that these two are arrays. So these two are the NumPy arrays. Arrays are uh, very similar in operation to list, but the benefit of the arrays is that if it is the NumPy array, then many of the numerical operations actually become faster using NumPy. So it is very easy to convert the arrays into list or list into arrays and things like that. So uh, these data are available in the NumPy array format. What we do now is that if you want to do certain further operation or if you want to see this data in an easy to analyze format, then we'll put this into data frame. That is what we are doing here. So I'm creating a data frame X by calling the pandas library, data frame function from there. And then to this function, that is the data frame function, I provide the parameters. So first I give it the X, which is a NumPy array. And then I give the column names as digit.features. So digit.feature name. So whatever is contained in the feature names, that will be taken and put that as a column. And same thing I do for Y. I call pandas library, data frame function. Now as parameters, I'll give Y, which contains the target here or the labels. And I give the column names as whatever is given in this dictionary as the target names. Okay. So after that, I have got two data frames done, and I am using this data frame solely to maybe analyze certain more information in an easier way with the pandas data frame. So first, I convert the X and Y into data frames. Then if I say here df.xhead, now it shows me what are the different columns. And as we know that it has 784 different columns, and each of these columns represent the pixel value of the image. And as we go to this side, we see that 0 means that that pixel value is white. And if there is some number here, it means that closer to 255, it means that darker the pixel is. And when we see the image, you will be able to see that. So all these are the pixel values of an image. And what does y contain? If we say dfy.head, y contains the classes. And these classes are taking the value of 0 to 9 because these are the digits. So it says that the first record is the digit 5, the second record is digit 0, the third record is digit 4, and so on. So y contains that what digit that is. The pixel values, with the pixel values we can draw the image, and the class is actually says that which it is the image of which digit. So the first record, so x0, that is the first record in x, is actually 5. The second record in x is actually 0, and we will draw that and we'll see. Now here we see that what are the different categories, or what are the values of y that we have seen earlier also, that if we see the value counts, then it give me the count of each of the value which we have in y. So it shows that there are 0, 1, 2, 3. So the values that we have here in the class column is 0 to 9. And here we, by saying value counts, we are getting the count of the records. So out of the 70,000 records that we have, it shows that uh, there are 6,903 images of 0, there are 7,877 images of 1, and so on. So here we see that we have almost a good distribution of the images of 0 to 9 in the 70,000 records that we have got. Then we see the shape. This one we knew that there are 70,000 records and there are 784 columns. It means that each image is having 784 features, and each feature is actually the representation of one pixel in the image. These things we have explored even earlier. Now we are just trying to plot this image, and I am plotting a few things randomly. So here it says that record number 51,515 is actually a 4, record number 20,221 is a 6. So I have just randomly drawn some 36 images from the data set. So you get a feel of what kind of data I have got. So this is the data we have got, which is the certain handwritten images. And the objective is to train the algorithm, to train our machine today to recognize what are these digits. So just as we teach a child that this is 4, this is 6, this is 4, this is 5, just as we teach a child to recognize different digits, similarly today we will teach our machine to recognize what these digits are. So if I show this image, the system should be able to say that this is 5. If I show this image, the system should be able to say that this is 1. Okay, so that is what we are trying to do today, and that's, to me, it looks very exciting thing, because the things which children take, and I was mentioning this on Monday also, that the things which children take several weeks and several months to learn, you will see that now the computers are learning that within a fraction of the minute, and that shows the power of the machines, especially in doing the certain specific tasks. The machines are actually now outperforming the human beings in many ways. That is sometimes very frightening, that with the increasing power of the algorithms, with the increasing computation power, uh, if the machines are doing everything better than human beings, then what would be the impact on the job market? What would the, what the life would look like 20 years from now? Because the power of machines are going on increasing, exponentially. In one of the sessions, I had talked about the quantum computing and the quantum computers, which IBM and Google are now the pioneers who are working on the quantum computers. It works on a very different principle, not on this silicon chips. They work on uh, different kind of architecture altogether. And with the quantum computing, the some of the results that we have is actually astounding, in the sense that the best of the supercomputers that we have available, whatever computation they will do in 10,000 years, that kind of computation is possible to be done with the quantum computer in just 3 minutes. So, and we are not talking about even our, laptops or the desktop or the servers that you may have in your companies. We are talking about supercomputers. So, the, uh, the quantum, with the help of the quantum computing, many of the complex tasks that could be, which takes maybe, days and months for us to compute or do the optimization, that could be done in a fraction of the second or a fraction of the minute. So some of these things are actually very astounding, and some of the things are posing a question as to what the future would be. And it is in that context that learning data science and machine learning is becoming so important, because it's changing the world in many fundamental ways. And today we will experiment with one of those things, that something which children take a long time to learn, the machines would learn in a fraction of the second, and that is what we will experiment. And that's why these things you should go and try out yourself, and you will see that how it really happens in such a simple way, and it will give you immense pleasure that you can't only teach the children in your home, but you can also teach some of these things to your machines now. So these are the kind of digits which has been given to us. So it gives us a good feel of what is that I have got in my data set. So in my data set, I have got the images of the handwritten digits, and I'm going to teach the machine how to identify whether this is a 0 or 1 or 2 or 3 or 4, things like that. Okay. So what we have got is the 784 pixels, but to be able to draw a picture, I reshape them into a two-dimensional um, matrix, 28 by 28, and that's why I use a reshape command. So this 784 is being brought into 28 by 28 matrix. Okay, and then we plot them. So all the white spots were having a zero value, and depending upon the blackness of the pixel, we are having different values. If it is near to 255, the value would be, very dark and not so dark, and things like that. So that's the data set we have got. This part we had done even yesterday. So having got the feeling of that, last time that we had done the exercise, we had used the train test split, which also can be done today also. But since when we read the description, we found that the data set is already arranged in a fashion that the 60,000 records are to be used as training set, and the remaining 10,000 as the testing set. That is what we have done here. So if you see, I am taking the first 60,000 records from the NumPy array that we had. So how do we extract the first 60,000? We can just give the colon and 60,000, means from beginning till 60,000. And since the index starts from 0, and whenever we do this slicing, we have seen in the past that 60,000, that record would not be taken. So it will be 0 up to 59999. So 60,000 records would be put into xtrain. I am dividing that by 255 every number, so that the normalization, or we are doing the min max scaling. So since the maximum value is only 255, the maximum would become 1, and the minimum will become 0. So since I have the values between 0 and 255, I am just doing a min max scaling. So I am dividing everything by 255. So min max scaling we have seen earlier in the context of the regression exercise also. So just try to understand this one. X is an array, NumPy array, and we are taking the first 60,000 records, dividing that by 255, so that I am doing a min max scaling, and that value will get stored into xtrain. Then I'm taking the remaining 10,000 records. So I'm saying 60,000 till the end. So the slicing, if you go back to the first few sessions that we had done in Python, this one means that the starting the 60th thousand record until the end. So we have 70,000 records. So it will go from record number 60,000 till the end. So that would be the last 10,000 records. Again, I am dividing everything by 255. Division of 255 is for the purpose of the min-max scaling. I am storing that to y test. Then the first 60,000 records of y. Here I am not dividing because this one is actually telling me which digit it is. It is not having the pixel value, so there is no need to do any division. So I take the first 60,000 records of y, store that to y train, last 10,000 of y, and I store that to y test. So I have 4 files now, x train, x test, y train, y test, which in this case I have derived in a different way rather than using the train test split. We could also use the train test split, but the only danger is that because the train test split will take the data randomly, we may not have the equal distribution of the 10 digits in the training set and the testing set. Then we see the shape of each of these, and then we see that X train has got now 60,000 records and 784 columns. Testing data set has got 10,000 records for X and 10,000 records for Y, and the training set has got 60,000 records for Y and 60,000 records for X. So now I have my data set ready. So again, to repeat the different steps that we have, first we need to get our data. Then we need to segregate the data into features and the labels, or the data and target, or the X and Y. With different names we will come across in different contexts. Having done that, we split the testing data and training data. That is what we performed in this step. So 3 things as our important steps. First, we fetch the data, which we did here. We fetch the data. After that, we analyze the data, which we have done partly here. Of course, a lot of analytics that we had done in the context of regression on the housing data set, that can also be done here, like finding the collinearity and outliers. Some of those things also can be done, but I'm not going through the entire process once again here. So we fetch the data, we analyze the data. So all this, some brief steps we have taken here, seeing what kind of data, seeing the image of that. So that was a part of the data analysis. Having analyzed the data, and we segregated that into X and Y here. So after fetching the data, which was we stored that into digit, then we segregated that into X and Y. That step we did here. So we segregated that into X and Y. After that, we did some analysis, and then we segregated that into the testing and training data. Having done that, now I am ready with my data set for running the algorithm. Next step is identify which algorithm I want to use, import that from the corresponding library. So we are first going to try out with the logistic regression. Logistic regression is a classification model. So it's not really a regression model, but in the backend it runs regression, and then it converts the result into different classes by using a logistic function, which we'll talk about later. So what it does is that whatever value you give, now using the logistic function, it will convert that into either a 0 or a 1 for a given class. So that is called the logistic regression. So once we identify the model, we create an instance of that model. And here we are creating the instance on the right side of the assignment. And that instance, we are assigning it to And that instance, we are assigning it to a variable name, and that name we are choosing as model, easy to identify. So we create an instance of the model, and here, just for the sake of remembering that which model we had used, I am also giving a name to the model, and that we will store because that we'll use sometime later. So let's perform this step. So we have imported the model, we have created the instance of the model. That is the most important thing to do here. Having created the instance, the next step is that now we will perform different functions on that instance, like the fit and the predict. So we'll come down here, the train and predict. So what we'll do is that here, the start time, end time, let's ignore that one. The two most important thing we are doing here is calling these two functions. So as we have seen here, that model here represents the instance of my uh, classification model. So here it is also showing you that model is actually an instance of logistic regression. It is showing you here. So as we point to it, it will show you the what that variable is all about. So it is showing you that this model is an instance of the logistic regression model, and then we'll call the fit function. So fit function is the one which we call for training the model. And for training, it requires the features and it requires the labels. So we provide these as the parameters x train and y train. And as we run this command, it will train the model. After training the model, we are making the prediction. So again, I call the model uh, instance of the model and call the predict function from there. And I want to predict the values for the X test. So X test was the one which was not seen by the model during the training. And therefore, we are making a prediction on X test, and then we'll see, analyze those values. So it will make the prediction, and all the predictions I'm going to store into a variable called pred. Okay, so let's run this step. Rest of the uh, syntax that you see is only to just to find out how much time it is taking. So we take the start time, we take the end time, and then we difference of that is the time which the model has taken. So start time is before it starts fitting, and end time is after it has made the prediction. So we just print and find out how much time the model has taken for training. So normally should take about maybe half a minute or so to train. Okay, yes, so it has taken 35 seconds to train and make the prediction. So with the model.fit, my model is trained, and with model.predict, I've also made the prediction on the testing data set. Okay, and all these predictions I have stored into pred. Fine. Then I want to see that, just get a feel of what was the prediction and what was the actual value. Okay, so so this zip command actually will zip two series. So I have one series called pred, and I have one series as ytest, or I have two different arrays. These arrays we can zip. It means that now it will take the first element of both of these and bring that into a single tuple. Then it will go to the second, third, and so on. So with that, I can see that what was the prediction and what is the actual result, which is contained in ytest. So if you see side by side, what it means is that the first record was 7. So for the first record, my prediction was 7 and the actual was 7. For the second record, my prediction was 2 and actual was 2. So it is matching everywhere. Let's see. Yeah. If we come to the ninth record, we see that my prediction was actually 6, where the actual was 5. So in my pred, which is the array I got after making the prediction with the model. I got 6, but the actual value which is coming from y test is actually 5. So it means that at some places my system is making a mistake. Next, we see that, okay, let's see where all the system is making a mistake and how many records are there which are unmatched. So now that I have got side by side this information about what is the prediction and what is the actual, now I can find out that how many records were unmatched, and that's what I am doing here. So just a very small program here which says that now I have zipped this into a list which I am calling as A. So I am running through the entire A. So all the records of A. So if I say np.shape A, it will give me the number of records. So I am running through all the records and I'm saying that where the first item is not equal to the second item. So if you say that the AI0 is giving me this element and AI1 is giving me this element. So I'm just finding out where this is not equal and do a count. So it is showing me that there are 742 records where the actual and prediction are not matching. So out of 10,000 records, which is there in X test, 742 records are not matching. Then we are just drawing a few, taking the examples of the ones where the system was making a wrong prediction. So if you see here, my prediction was 7. So I have taken out of those 742 records which were not matched, I am taking a few of them and seeing that which were those records which did not match. So if you see that some of these are actually very close, where even we might be confused, I mean, not that much because we have a long experience of recognizing the numbers, but some of these you will see that it's very close. For example, here, it is actually 4, but my prediction was 9. So actually, if you see the way this 4 is written, we could also sometimes perceive that maybe it was 9. If you see here, the way that 3 is written, and my prediction was 0, so it's actually close. Okay. In some cases, we wonder that why this 7 was read by the system as 8. This is very odd. But some of these are very close. For example, this 3 is very close to 0. This 4 is very close to 9. This 3 is very close to 5. So actually, the system is making some reasonable mistakes. So having seen this, now we come to the accuracy, which is given by the score command here. So if you say model.score and then give the X test and Y test, it will give me the accuracy. It is showing the accuracy of 0.9258, which is not bad at all. 92% of the times, it has given me the right digit. So it means that my model is now reading the numbers correct 92% of the times. And then we can draw what is called as the confusion matrix. And this is what we need to understand today. Confusion matrix is telling you, so on the x-axis, if you see, so the system itself is, from system itself, we can get the confusion matrix by getting this command, matrix.confusion matrix. By this, we'll get the confusion matrix. What the confusion matrix is telling is that for each of these digits which we have from 0 to 9, what was the original value and what is the, how many times it got the original value and how many times it got the incorrect value. So on the x-axis, these numbers, it is showing the actual values. It means that actually it was 0, and then whatever is given here is the predicted value. So let's see how to read the confusion matrix. What it means is that there were 959 times that a 0 was recognized as 0. And if you take this number, that is a, let me use the annotation so that it becomes easier. So if you see this number here, what does it mean? It means that my 10 times my 0 was predicted to be 5. So the actual number was 0, but the my prediction was that this is 5, and that happened 10 times. There were 9 times that 0 was read as 6, and so on. So if you take, say, this number, what does it mean? It means that actual number was 3, but it was read as 8 23 times, because 3 and 8 are very close when you write. So 23 times the actual number was 3, but our system read that as 23. Let's see what is this 25, which is also a large number. So it means that the actual number was 5, but it was read as 8. And let's also see this large number 29. My actual number was 8, and it was read as 5. So maybe 5 and 8, the system is confusing a lot. Okay. So that's how we read the confusion matrix. And obviously all these things which are on the diagonal, it means that 9 was read as 9, was 925 times. 6 was read as 6, was 912 times. So this confusion matrix gives me a picture of how many times it was read. 0 was read as 0, 0 was read as 1, 0 was read as 2, or the other digits. Okay. So this confusion matrix now becomes my basis for analysis. So now you know that from this confusion matrix, you can derive how many false positives and how many false negatives. Now, how do we know the false negatives and false positives here? So if 0 was recognized as 0, that is true positive. Okay. So I am testing for 0. So if my result is 0, that is the true positive. Now it's actually 0, but it is 1. So my prediction is 1. My diagnosis is that this digit is not 0. So 1 is actually 0. So we'll take some other number. Let's take this 5 itself. So it was actually 0, but my prediction was 5. What does it mean? That my diagnosis was that this is negative. So my diagnosis, so when I analyze, when I diagnose 0, so I am trying to see that whether it is 0 or not, and it says that this is not 0. It means that my test result was negative, but actually it was 0. So this would be false negative. Okay. So with the confusion matrix, you can find out how many are true positive, how many are true negative, and so on. That is what will become the basis for us for finding out what is the accuracy, what is the precision and recall, and so on. Okay. So the same thing, if you want to draw it a bit more beautifully, then you can use the Seaborn. So the same data I'm drawing here. So just to give you a feel that either you can see the confusion matrix uh, like this by using the style parameter on this table, or we can present that in a somewhat more beautiful fashion, because the data visualization is also a very important part of the data science. So for our quick estimation, we could just see like this. Otherwise, you can draw a heat map using the Seaborn library. So in this one, the command is very simple. We first import cbond, then we call the heat map function from the cbond. There I supply the data set. So we had stored our confusion matrix into a variable called con matrix. That becomes my data set on which the heat map would be drawn. Now CMap is the color map. Color map I has used as the cool warm. It means that if it is the number is higher, it will draw that as red, and if the number is lower, it will take as blue. So it becomes very easy for us to see here that the red ones are actually the higher numbers and the blue ones are the lower numbers. And not is equal to true, it means that in these boxes, it will also show the values, that how many records are there. If I say this as false, or if I don't mention that, it will only draw the boxes, but it will not give the number. Now the square is that each of these should be presented as a square. Line width is for these separator lines between these squares. Format is that in what format the number should be shown. And C bar is that the color bar. If I give it as true, it will draw a color bar which will demonstrate to you that what shade actually represents what number. I think we should come here. If I say C bar is equal to true, then it will give you a bar on the right side, which will show you that what color represents which number. So if it is dark red, it is above 1000. If it is, say dark blue, then it is close to 0. So that color bar can be drawn. So we have drawn the heat map, and we are saying that it is on the diagonals, that is the same number being recognized as that number is fairly high. So my accuracy should actually be good. Now I just do the same division. I find out the true positives. I find out the true negatives, false positive. I find out the false negative. I have the total number, and then I just print them. So if you see, this is what we get. So total observation is showing as 0, which is something has gone wrong. Okay, we'll come to that why total observation is coming as 0. But we are seeing here that the true positive, false positive, we are able to now extract from the confusion matrix. And then we get the precision, we get the recall, we get the F1 score. So either we can compute that manually, or simply I have another command available called metrics.classification report. So if you call the classification report function from the metrics library, and if we give the y-test and the predictions that we had made, then we are able to get all these from the single command. So I have just given you this piece of code that if you want to compute this manually, this is how you go about. And but you don't really need to do that. This will actually help you understand the computations much more closely, but you don't need to do that. We just go to metrics, we call the classification report function, and as parameters we give the y-test, which is my y-test data set, and the predictions that we have made, and then we get everything here. So you see the accuracy here is 0.93, and the precision, recall these numbers, and F1 score is the harmonic mean of the precision and recall. So precision recall we discussed in brief. We'll spend more time in understanding that in what context we should use precision, in what context we should use recall, in what context I should use the F1 score. But today we'll just focus on accuracy. So accuracy of this model is 93%. Okay. Given the time, we'll just experiment with one more model, and you will see, just to get it ingrained in your mind that what are the different steps. So after I have got my data set ready, let me give something which gives you a better score. So we will use now another model, which is called the MLP classifier. So we import that model, we create an instance of that model, and then having created the instance, we repeat the same process. Now we will fit that model. It means that we are training that model with the X train and Y train data, and then it will make the prediction. And we'll see that how much this model is giving us. We'll just wait for about maybe half a minute or so for the system to learn. So when we come to the computer, even half a minute or 1 minute is looking like a long time to learn how to read digits. But we as human beings have actually spent several months trying to learn this. So let's see how much time this model takes to learn how to read these digits. And after that, we'll go and run our precision score and see that how much is the precision and recall. So with this, actually, we are doing two things. We are not just seeing the earlier in the housing data set, we are dealt with only numbers. Now, actually, we are dealing with images. So this exercise that we are doing, I am doing it purposely for um, to achieve two objectives. One is, of course, to understand how the classification works. But second, at the same time, what we are also doing is to deal with images. Although these images are simple, just black and white images of different digits, but we are also learning in the process that how easily the system can actually read the different images. And when we say images, the system understands the images as just the pixel values. I mean, uh, um, as human beings, we see the images as some picture or some drawings, but for the computer, the image is nothing but a number, a series of numbers, and these numbers represent the pixel values. So it took about 2 minutes to train, and now we have, let's see what it results are. So now you see last time this 5 was read as 6, but this time this model is able to recognize that 5 as 5. It means that looks like there is some improvement. We'll run this one. Last time there was 742 errors. This time there were only 1214 errors. That this model is trained much more perfectly. And let's see what kind of errors it has done. So here, this is actually 9, and our prediction is 4, which is very close. Now, 9 and 4. So some of these things are saying, is getting much closer to what the reality is. For example, this 5 and 9, even we could confuse that whether this is 9 or 5. Let's see the precision. It is 97% now. We'll skip this drawing the confusion matrix, and we'll directly come to getting the classification report. And now if we click on the classification report, now you see that everything is around 98%. So my precision is around 98, recall is 98, 99, F1 score is 99, and accuracy is 98%. So we have got a very good model now. So out of 10,000 records, it has given me 98% precision. It means that my system is now recognizing things wrongly only 2 out of 100 times, which is very good. Okay, so now you can actually experiment with some of these things, and you can see that you would be able to train the machines in reading things, in identifying the images. So all these images we have given, and we are training them to identify that whether it is 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 and so on. Okay, so we'll experiment with the other models tomorrow. The process will remain the same. So tomorrow we'll also go into that. If we have to experiment with different models, how do we bring that into a function or a class? And we can run that in one shot rather than doing it one by one by one. So I'll stop today here. So today we have learned the different parameters with which we can analyze the effectiveness of our classification model and how to run that. So tomorrow we'll continue with this and we'll spend some more time on precision, recall, why we don't use accuracy all the time. So we'll go into some of those concepts. If there are no questions for today, then we can stop here and then again we'll meet tomorrow at 7. Any questions? Sure. So these notebooks would be available to you in the same folder. Try to go through it and see what each command means and why do we use each command. Note down your questions and come back with the questions. So if we'll stop today and we'll meet again tomorrow. Thanks and see you tomorrow.